So good afternoon. It's great to be here today at the Greater Boston Food Bank, and Representative Dr. Santiago, I want to thank you for joining us today, and I especially want to thank you for all the work that you and your colleagues at Boston Medical Center did every day, but especially over the course of the past 120 days or so. Your videos, by the way, were sort of must-see TV for many of us in policy and in healthcare during that period. The Lieutenant Governor, Karen Polito, and Secretary Sutters and Secretary Theodoridis and I are all grateful for the opportunity that Catherine and the team gave us to tour this food bank facility and to see some of the work that's being done here to address food insecurity every single day, especially during this public health emergency. We're here today to share an update on our administration's work to address food insecurity and announce the opening of an application process. It's a grant program that we announced last month to help address this issue in particular. But first, I do want to give an update on public health metrics with respect to COVID-19. On Monday, I think as everybody knows, we began phase 2 of our reopening program. Over the past few days, restaurants have opened for outdoor dining, retail stores have welcomed customers inside, and other businesses and activities have restarted. We're glad to be able to responsibly open up more parts of our economy, but as everybody knows, continued progress in reopening depends on our ability to keep pushing back against COVID-19. We're glad to see the public health data continues to move in the right direction, a clear indication that we continue to make progress in this fight against the virus. Yesterday, over 10,000 tests were reported and only 267 new cases were confirmed positive. As of yesterday, we've conducted over 660,000 tests across the Commonwealth. The average positive test rate is down to 4.2%. That's about an 86% reduction in the number of positive cases on a percentage basis since April 15th. And the number of people that remain hospitalized due to COVID is down to 1,386, which is down over 60% since the middle of April. And obviously, we hope to continue to see positive development on those trends as we move further into phase 2 and beyond. Now, with respect to today's visit at the food bank, food security has obviously been something the administration has been working hard to address with many of our colleagues in state government, in local government, and in the food business here in Massachusetts prior to the pandemic. But like in so many other areas, this public health emergency has heightened the concerns and the needs of many of our vulnerable families and communities. We recognize that this crisis has made things more difficult for families that were food insecure and has obviously increased the need in many communities across Massachusetts. There are many people and many families who've never called on places like the Greater Boston Food Bank for help before, but now they really need it. The increased demand underscores the importance of organizations like the Greater Boston Food Bank and so many of their peer organizations around the Commonwealth. The Lieutenant Governor and I and others have had the opportunity to visit this facilities many times and talk to the team. And each time we do, we're all reminded about what an asset this organization is for Boston and for the Commonwealth as a whole. Last year, the food bank distributed over 68 million pounds of food across a wide area that stretched from the Cape Cod border, or from the New Hampshire border to Cape Cod, the islands, and the South Coast. In a minute, you'll hear more about what's been going on here at GBFB from Catherine D'Amato, who can talk specifically about the food bank's incredible work. COVID-19 has affected everybody here in the Commonwealth in one way or another, but some of our communities have obviously been disproportionately impacted. Last month, we announced a $56 million investment to combat urgent food insecurity for some Massachusetts families and individuals as a result of COVID-19. That funding was a recommendation of a food security task force that we put together earlier this spring. The task force was established to provide more access to food assistance during COVID-19, and we're pleased to have representatives from the Greater Boston Food Bank as part of that group. One of the investments we announced last month was a new $36 million food security infrastructure grant program to provide individuals and families with access to fresh local food. Today we're here to announce that the administration has opened applications for that grant program. The The program is open to organizations that are part of the Massachusetts local food system, including production, processing, distribution, and community food organizations. In addition to those organizations, school meal programming, urban farms, community gardens, and other organizations that are involved in this effort can also apply. Applications will be evaluated on a rolling basis through the fall, September 15, 2020. The funds are part of a broader $56 million investment that we announced last month as part of our work to implement the recommendations of the Food Security Task Force. Other investments include a $5 million increase in the Healthy Incentives Program to meet increased demand for local produce and to increase access points that produce SNAP and HIP benefits. $3 million in funding for immediate relief for food banks, $12 million for the provision of 25,000 family food boxes per week through a regional food supply system. Each family food box contains 30 to 35 meals, and the food boxes are distributed throughout the state. This work will continue through the summer as needed. We'll continue to bring every resource that we can to bear here in the Commonwealth as we continue to fight COVID-19. And we'll work with the Food Security Task Force and our partners in the legislature to continue to address food security issues going forward and to ensure that every family and individual in the Commonwealth has access to food. The House and Senate have been tremendous proponents on this issue for a very long time, and they help to make many of these resources available. Ensuring that families have the food that they need on the table will always be one of the crucial priorities that we continue to work with our colleagues on as we recover and seek to move forward in the weeks and months to come. I also just want to say, having walked through the facility here, it's almost every organization that does almost anything has had to pivot and change in a pretty significant way the way it operates to deal with many of the constraints and the obstacles and the disruptions that have been associated with COVID-19. But the work that's been done by this organization and so many other organizations who are part of this food security network to think differently about the way they both packaged and delivered product so that they could make it possible for people to continue to access the food that they needed, but do so in a way that would be safe, given that historically a lot of this has been done by bringing it to food pantries and then giving people the ability to shop. You really can't do that in a COVID-19 environment for a whole bunch of reasons. So what people have done is they've created packaging that in many cases carries as much as a week's worth of fruits and vegetables, a week's worth of dry goods, a week's worth of other kinds of protein, and made those boxes available to people, and then those boxes become the vehicle through which they actually get access to those services. And in some cases, they just go directly to the places where most of these folks live and have it distributed there. I know it feels like we've been in this thing for a very long time, but it's pretty impressive to think that a big supply chain like this, which is national in many respects and certainly statewide when you get here in Massachusetts, has done so many things to think differently in the course of about 3 months to make sure that it had the ability to both continue to provide more product, in many cases as much as 50 or 60% more product than they'd historically delivered, and come up with delivery models that were actually safer from an infection control point of view than the way they've done it historically. It's a real tribute, honestly, to everybody who's been part of this exercise. And with that, I want to turn it over to Lieutenant Governor Polito.
Yes, that's definitely worth cheering for. It's great to be here at the Greater Boston Food Bank, to see many of the volunteers hard at work to package and deliver food to individuals and families across our Commonwealth, especially during these challenging times. That's very reassuring and very inspirational for all of us. I also want to thank the Food Security Insecurity Task Force for all of their collaboration, members of the legislature, everyone working together to see this grant made possible. It's really a great effort. I'm also pleased to announce a new initiative today to help small businesses and communities recover as we continue through the Commonwealth's reopening process. Even with Phase 2 reopenings this week, we must still remain vigilant taking precautions, wearing our face coverings when entering public spaces, washing our hands, and trying to stay at least 6 feet away from others. And the pandemic has highlighted existing mobility needs and created new ones as more people get out and about, such as having sufficient spaces for people to walk and physically distance from others and be spaced apart when outside, and line queues at retail stores, and as we've all become accustomed to at our groceries stores. Today we're launching this new program called the Shared Streets and Spaces Emergency Grant Program, and this was coordinated through the efforts of the team at MassDOT. It's a total of $5 million, and it will be available directly to municipalities. This is a new grant program, as I stated, which will provide grants as small as $5,000 and as big as $300,000 for municipalities to quickly launch or expand improvements to sidewalks, curbs, streets, on-street parking spaces, and off-street parking lots in support of public health, safe mobility, and renewed commerce in their communities. This is like the restaurant in your downtown or your main street that you might see opening now with outdoor dining in a parking lot or in a parklet or using sidewalks. These funds will be directly available for a municipality to help these businesses create more comfortable and exciting spaces in your community so that people can get out safely and enjoy the offerings at their local establishments. Some of these projects will help calm roadways, modify sidewalks or streets, and repurpose on or off-street parking where needed to better support curbside, sidewalk, and street retail and dining. Other projects will create safe connections to essential destinations and workplaces, including new and expanded facilities for bus transportation, putting in flex posts, and creating a bike lane. We designed this program because we heard from a lot of municipal leaders that they both needed help but wanted to help. And so to the mayors and town managers and business leaders and school superintendents and families who've all been thinking ahead, this is a resource, and in partnership, we'll be able to help create these safer, more exciting places within community to help people safely move about. MassDOT will support municipalities as they implement these projects, and we also want to thank the Barr Foundation. The Barr Foundation will provide free technical assistance to municipal officials, help them fill out their applications and walk them through this process, and help them strategize and problem solve around how to transition these places within their communities to these new opportunities. The website will be launched shortly, and MassDOT has made this process as easy as possible. A simple application with lots of resources and inspiration and assistance, and the applications will be available on June 22nd. The applications will be available on June 22nd. Massachusetts can be a leader in helping our cities and towns improve their economies. Many of these businesses that have suffered great losses since March, so this is an exciting new opportunity and partnership. These streets are crucial public spaces, and when used safely and well, can be a key ingredient in a mindful COVID-19 recovery process, as well as help to make our communities more resilient for the future. As I stated, MassDOT is committed to acting on these applications quickly. So quick launch, simple process, and a rolling application process. So when the applications come in, they will be reviewed, decided upon, and the funds directly given to the communities through the Chapter 90 program. In closing, I want to thank our cities and towns, our regional planning agencies, our partners at the Barr Foundation for everything they do to make our communities safer, stronger, and better. And with that, it is my great honor to turn this over to Catherine D'Amato, a real thought leader, inspirational leader, and to you and your team and the countless number of volunteers here. Thank you so very much.
So everyone, welcome to the Greater Boston Food Bank. I have three things I'd like to say in a very short time. One is to say thank you. The second is to address this surging and ongoing need. And the last is to really bring home how much we need to maintain our vigilance and momentum regarding fighting food insecurity in our state. So thank you, Governor Baker, Lieutenant Baker, Secretary Sutter, Secretary Theodoris. Thank you for visiting us and being here today and taking the tour and seeing the resilient and important work of the team that's downstairs, that's here every single day. We are grateful to our team members who are workforce essential frontline workers to ensure that food gets out every single day. I also want to thank our network. There are over 550 agencies in 190 cities and towns, and the strength of that network is something for you to understand. We have less than 3% of those agencies that have closed, which means they are operating, they are present, and that is a record in our country. But it speaks to their resilience as well and their commitment to feed those in need. I do want to thank Governor Baker and Lieutenant Governor for your leadership and identifying and putting into place this food security task force. It's going to make a significant difference going forward in our state. And this is just something that has been evident. We've had food insecurity for a long time in our state. It's not something that just popped up due to COVID-19, but it has been exacerbated by COVID-19, like many things have. And in such, the Food Security Task Force is going to be able to address, as the Lieutenant Governor noted and the Governor noted, these opportunities to apply for grants to be able to build infrastructure in our state and to move things forward. So we are grateful as the Greater Boston Food Bank to have a seat at that table and to be invited into these conversations, because we know that the food banks across the state, the nearly 1,000 feeding programs across the state, programs like Project Bread, MLRI, our state agency partners in MDAR, DESE, DPH, and DTA have been all phenomenal. And that takes leadership from the governor and the lieutenant governor to be able to push that forward, and we are deeply grateful. So your teams, Governor and Lieutenant Governor, have been incredible. They always were, but this is a way that we have seen them rise and have the conversations around food insecurity across our state. The dedication and working alongside to do things in the last 90 to 120 days, as the governor noted, contracts have been adjusted, obtaining USDA waivers, training partner agencies on how to help with SNAP outreach and SNAP applications, and so much more have all been here to help what is now addressed by Feeding America, a 53% increase in food insecurity, and Massachusetts now being the second highest state in the nation for increased risk of food insecurity among children. This now puts us at 1 in 7 people will experience food insecurity, and 1 in 5 is a child. That is what we are facing now. Those are extraordinary numbers. Those are deeply painful numbers. Those are numbers that will require us to stay focused. But not surprisingly, it's supported by not just the national study, but we're seeing a 50% increase of need at the community level. GBFB used to spend about $60,000 a month on food. We're now spending up to $3 million a month on food. We have record food prices and a disruption to our supply chain, and nearly a 400% increase in SNAP applications across our state. So we applaud and want to be very clear. We applaud you, Governor Baker, and Lieutenant Governor Polito, and your teams, alongside with our legislature, to make a statement and address food insecurity at this time and in this way. It is the momentum we all need to make Massachusetts a food secure state. We must remain vigilant, and we pledge to work with you. We pledge to work with your teams. We pledge to solve problems with you, to create sustainable solutions that will allow for recovery and build back better so we can all emerge stronger. Together, we can end hunger here, and we can, together, make Massachusetts a food secure state. So So thank you for being here, and I'd like to introduce Secretary Sudders.
Thank you, Catherine. It's a pleasure to be back at the food bank, whether you and I are walking through Newmarket Square or walking in the halls with all the food. Yep, no, I always feel very welcome here. Thank you, Governor, Lieutenant Governor, and my good colleague, Secretary Theourides. I want to thank the Greater Boston Food Bank for hosting us today and for all the work you're doing to keep families safe during COVID-19 pandemic and to help Massachusetts become a food secure state. The pandemic has greatly impacted many families' financial stability across the state and has hit working families and our residents who've historically experienced food insecurity particularly hard. We know there are many families in all parts of the state who are dealing with food and economic insecurity as a result of the pandemic. Every individual family and community should have access to nutritious food. Community-based organizations, including the Greater Boston Food Bank and local pantries, have also seen a significant increase in demand, and you heard what Catherine said in terms of the amount that they're spending every month in getting food out. We've seen increasing food benefit applications for safety net programs like SNAP, WIC, and seen an increase in the number of applications for Mass Health, which is our Medicaid program. The COVID-19 Command Center quickly convened the Food Security Task Force in April, which is chaired by Secretary Theourides, Commissioner Kershaw, and Jill Shaw of the Shaw Family Foundation, and made up of members from public and private agencies and the legislature, who brought their expertise and wisdom to the immediacy of the pandemic and to bridge opportunities into whatever our new normal will look like. The 4 immediate actionable areas were to develop and implement an emergency food program, fortify the food bank system, maximize federal resources for food and nutrition, and reinforce and redeploy the food system infrastructure. As you heard the governor say, we announced the $56 million in support to start addressing these needs, including the $36 million infrastructure grants, which Secretary Theourides will go into. The $5 million for the Healthy Incentives Program, $3 million for food banks, and $12 million in emergency food boxes. And as we were having the tour, we saw about 17,500 boxes that are being packed and sent out across the state. And this week, we took additional steps to put the funding in action, as you've heard, which as you will hear more about. The other things we've done, we established the emergency food distribution sites and school meal sites for food across the Commonwealth. We implemented the pandemic EBT program to provide food to almost 500,000 youth who had usually received free or reduced price lunches. We implemented the online EBT purchasing that went live on May 29th, and as of yesterday, there were 11,276 transactions totaling more than $1 million. Before I hand over the podium to Secretary Theourides, I want to give a shout out to Bithia Carter, who's president of New England Blacks in Philanthropy and a member of the Governor's Black Advisory Council. Feels like forever ago, but it was only probably a few weeks ago when the governor and I were meeting with the council. The $56 million food security package was discussed, and we were urged to use an equity lens in the development of the grants and review process. Bithia, I contacted Bithia after the meeting, and she took me up on the offer to provide guidance to the infrastructure grant in our review process. So I'm deeply appreciative of the insights that have been incorporated into the infrastructure grants opportunity, as well as the review process going forward. Thank you. Secretary Theourides.
Thank you, Secretary Sudders and Lieutenant Governor, and thank you to the Greater Boston Food Bank for hosting us today, and to Catherine for your team's work, and for the group who came together as part of the Food Security Task Force. The Greater Boston Food Bank and other food banks across the Commonwealth play an extraordinary role in the emergency food safety net for families in need. We thank you for your partnership during this time and also for your long-standing partnership over the years, especially through the Commonwealth's Massachusetts Emergency Food Assistance Program. We at EEA and the Mass Department of Agriculture have been particularly thrilled to work with the food bank through our Mass Grown initiative to ensure that a portion of this food assistance comes directly from our local farms and producers here in the Commonwealth. Increasing food security and the resiliency of our food system is critical to protecting the health of Massachusetts residents. This ongoing crisis has highlighted the importance of reinforcing our local food supply chain and ensuring that the food grown and produced here in Massachusetts reaches all our residents, especially vulnerable populations and those struggling with food insecurity. Thanks to the work of the Food Security Task Force led by the Command Center, Massachusetts has released a request for responses for the new $36 million Food Security Infrastructure Grant that the Governor announced a moment ago. The program will provide grants up to $500,000 for projects that will help ensure that individuals and families throughout the Commonwealth have access to nutrition, with a special focus on food that is produced locally and advances equitable access to food, not during this crisis, but over the long term. And something Catherine said here really rings true. This is a situation where we want to build back better and really increase that resilience over the long term. Building on the recommendations of the Food Security Task Force, we are also seeking project proposals focused on ensuring that Massachusetts farmers, fishermen, and other local food producers that have been hit hard during this pandemic are better connected to a strong, resilient food supply chain to help mitigate future food supply and distribution disruptions. Throughout the pandemic, our local producers have met numerous challenges in getting their food to market, and this program will help to build out the infrastructure needed to strengthen those new markets and to connect them to food insecure communities. We're also working through this program to address equity and to ensure that residents that have historically experienced food insecurity, live in food deserts or environmental justice neighborhoods, and lack access to local food options, particularly communities of color, gateway cities, and low-income residents, have access to fresh, healthy local food. The program also seeks to support minority and urban producers and minority and women-owned businesses. The grants will fund investments in technology, equipment, increased capacity, and other assistance to help producers distribute food, especially to food insecure communities. We have a number of different examples pulled together in the RFR, and one that Secretary Sutters noted. We're looking for grants to support urban farms and community gardens and other resources used to grow food in urban areas. I'm personally thrilled about seeing children get outside this summer and have the opportunity to grow and eat food grown with their own hands. This could also cover things like food processing facilities and food collaboratives, a great resource for our local fishermen and aquaculturists who don't have that support to come together and to sell their product, as well as equipment for sanitation, remote ordering, and curbside pickup. The program has also been tightly linked to the Healthy Incentive Program, and we seek additional producers and vendors to expand that access. This program will help give them the infrastructure they need in the form of equipment to help them accept the benefits. As the Governor mentioned, applications will be available on a rolling basis through September 15th, and we are also looking to do this in a similar way to the grant program that MassDOT is rolling out. Very simple application, rolling process, and getting the money out the door as quickly and easily as possible. We're grateful for our strong local industries here in the Commonwealth, our farmers and fishermen and food producers, and I'm looking forward to the significant investment in the infrastructure we need to continue to respond to the impacts of this pandemic while creating a system that provides greater, more equitable access to nutrition and strengthens the role of local food in the Commonwealth's overall food system. Thank you very much.
Questions on this?
Governor, other states that are reopening faster are starting to see a spike in cases. Is that something you're concerned about here in Massachusetts? And what, if anything, is the state doing to prepare for a possible second surge?
Well, first of all, part of the reason for pursuing a careful and cautious and phased approach to reopening was to be sure that we would be able to deal with hotspots or any examples of increased positive testing along the way. But we've also built into this a number of initiatives that are designed to help us deal with COVID-19 along the way. The first is, every employer has a set of statewide standards they have to abide by to reopen that are related to the best guidance from a variety of public health organizations. Secondly, most of the industry sectors that have been given permission to open have a set of industry protocols that they also need to abide by, and they have to attest to those protocols in a very public way. Third, the Lieutenant Governor spent many, many hours with our colleagues in local government to be sure that they know and understand exactly what the rules are for local businesses and employers as they go through the process of opening. And finally, the whole point behind creating a tracing program to go alongside an enhanced testing program was so that we would be able to quickly identify people who tested positive, help them isolate and support them in their isolation, access their close contacts, and ensure that we could do the same with their close contacts. And so far, that approach, a careful phase-in, a lot of guidance and advisory information for employers and businesses, a lot of support for cities and towns with respect to the role they have in overseeing this, and an aggressive testing and tracing program is doing the right kinds of things. But we're going to be very vigilant on this stuff, and we've said all along that additional openings are going to be a function of a continued review of the data points that are on that checklist that we distributed when the Lieutenant Governor released the reopening report.
Governor, you're coming up with a statewide certification process for police. Can you tell us anything about that? And also, the House just outlined some points for legislation as well. Also, why do you think it took so long for Beacon Hill to pay attention to this issue?
Well, we've been, we meet, Lieutenant Governor and I meet every 90 days or so with the Black and Latino Caucus, and we've been doing that for the past 5 years. And over that period of time, a whole bunch of issues have come up and have been addressed either on the administrative side through issues around data reporting and transparency associated with purchasing and hiring and all the rest, but also statutory initiatives around criminal justice reform. The $80 million we put out for home ownership programs and a variety of other initiatives. And in fact, a big part of the reform bill that we filed in January with respect to the state police came from conversations we'd had with the caucus. And this idea of creating a certification program for the law enforcement community here in Massachusetts also came out of conversations we've been having with the caucus, and we've been working with them on that for, I'm going to say, at least the past 6 to 9 months, maybe, and we expect and anticipate we'll file legislation on this shortly.
For instance, Boston outlawed the chokehold, years ago, well after Ferguson, for instance, and now we're just starting to see movement on something like that at the state level. Why do you think it took this amount of time?
I can't speak to the whys or the hows. What I can say is that I am very excited about the fact that a bunch of these issues are likely to get addressed between now and the end of the session.
More about the certification at all,
But then you all come to the press conference when we file it. Yeah. So we're going to file it soon.
As you craft this legislation, are you concerned, or do you look at possible pushback from the police unions?
Look, I think I hope everybody at this point understands that there needs to be more transparency and accountability around law enforcement. And I say that as somebody who is a big believer in and supporter, and I know the Lieutenant Governor is as well, of the law enforcement community. They do some really important things, and the vast majority of them live up to the oath that they swear. But as we saw with the state police issues we had, which were more administrative than related to excessive force, there needs to be checks and balances in that system. The legislation we filed with respect to the state police was designed specifically to address many of those checks and balances, and I hope that legislation finds its way through the process as well. But I do believe that what we're going to file will do what I believe a lot of people want to see done, which is to create a process that creates more transparency and accountability so that the law enforcement officers who are doing the right thing get the training and the benefit of that training and the opportunity to continue to protect and serve their communities, but there's a very fundamental and explicit process to deal with those who don't.
What are your thoughts on the calls to defund the police, though?
So I'm one of these people who's always thought that at the end of the day, if you're a public official, you should always be looking for opportunities to improve the quality of the way you operate and the way you do your work, and you should be humble enough to recognize that you don't have all the answers. I tend to believe that our job at the state level is to do everything we can to support our colleagues in municipal government to make sure they have the resources they need to do their job. And One of the things we've been spending a fair amount of time on for the last few weeks with respect to that is talking to colleagues at the federal level and to other governors about working to ensure that there will be what I call a state and municipal government relief bill that gets passed sometime this summer, because I do believe that state governments and municipal governments are going to need the federal government's assistance if we are going to be part of the positive reopening of the economy. My message to a lot of the folks in Washington has been, if you want to continue to see positive movement on employment and economic growth, you can't have cities and towns and states around the country heading in exactly the opposite direction. Our goal is going to be to do the best that we can to provide locals with the resources that they need, and then they need to make decisions about what they think the best and most appropriate way to spend those are. But as a general rule, I'm not a big believer that I've never believed that the best way to solve any problem in government is just across the board anything. And we've been pretty, I think, effective over the last 5 years in making decisions about resource allocation that are based on data and information.
Governor, in light has also been an issue. Some people getting followed home. Officers, any plan to help on that end?
I think, again, what I would say there is our role, more often than not, is to provide support to our colleagues in local government with whatever the issue is, and we have a lot of resources that we can bring to bear to assist them, and we talk to them all the time. And I continue to think that the best way for us to support them is to maintain an open door and to make sure that if they have issues or concerns they want us to help them with, that they reach out, and we'll do what we can to help them.
Governor, in light of some emails and phone records that have surfaced, do you stand by your timeline that neither you nor Secretary Sutters knew about the extent of the situation at the Holyoke Soldiers' Home until that Sunday?
Yeah, I do. And as I said about 2 weeks ago, that Mark Perlstein, who we brought on to write his report on the Holyoke Soldiers' Home, that he was sort of rounding the final turn, and I expect his report will be out sometime soon. But I'm not going to comment on it beyond that until that report gets out, because in the end, I think that's going to be a far more comprehensive representation of what took place than sort of the bits and bytes that show up along the way here.
Will you want to stop the families from getting retribution? I mean, what do you say to those families who may try to get retribution? You obviously did the emergency order.
Yeah, the emergency order was put in place to support the healthcare community, which was walking into uncharted territory with respect to serving people on an issue that was a new virus for which there was very little known. Still, in many respects, there's an ongoing debate right now about what it is, how it works, and what we can all do about that. But I think in many ways there was broad consensus on that legislation. I mean, the trial bar in Massachusetts, the plaintiff bar, basically supported it. And I think the reason people felt that was appropriate was because of the tremendous amount of unknown information associated with how to treat and how to deal with this issue.
The House and the Senate are kind of at odds with the MBTA board and the legislation that they're going to put forward. Yeah. We don't know what that it's going to be, but one plan has you naming the GM, the other plan does not have you or the Secretary naming the GM of the T. Is that a power you want to retain?
What I've said all along on this is that I happen to think that part of the reason the T got into some of the difficulty, both financially, operationally, and organizationally, that it got into was because it got removed from what I think of as the accountability of the governor's office and the executive branch generally. And part of the point behind creating the Fiscal Management Control Board, which the legislature was very helpful on, and chasing many of the reforms that we've chased as a result of the formation of that board, has been the fact that the executive branch, the administration, me, the lieutenant governor, the secretary of transportation, own a big piece of the accountability for what happens there. And that translates into a far more transparent agency that I believe is a lot more accountable to the public. In addition to that, the T gets about $1 billion a year from taxpayers through general fund sales tax money from people who never ride it. And I think going forward, the more accountable that the T can be and the operation and leadership of the T can be to the executive branch and by definition to the governor and lieutenant governor, the better off we're all going to be. There's a certain amount of public accountability and transparency that comes with that that's important. So, yeah, I think the governor should have a role in appointing the general manager. Yeah.
What is the future of the National Guard? The mayor has said that he believes they'll be tamping back. What is the future of the National Guard right now in its current role in the state?
Well, the first thing I want to say about the National Guard is the National Guard has been mustering in Massachusetts since 1620. Okay, 150 years before we had a United States of America. All right, this is not a new entity. This is an organization that's been part of the fabric of the Commonwealth for a very long time. And the so-called citizen soldier who serves in the National Guard is somebody who volunteers, who has another job that they do, 9 to 5, that volunteers to do this because they want to have an opportunity to give back with respect to fighting fires, delivering on all kinds of missions associated with bad weather, rescue missions. I mean, they've been incredibly valuable to us and to the people of the Commonwealth over the course of the past 5 years. And we called them up in March to help us deal with COVID-19, and they've been called up since March. And at some point, when we get past COVID and all the other stuff that the Guard's been up to and been doing, we'll stand them down. But in the meantime, they've been involved in an enormous number of missions of one kind or another over the last 5 years, and one kind or another for the past several months. And as I've said before, most of the time, all the time, when we use the Guard, it's typically to respond to local community concerns and assistance and support. There's some stuff they do specifically for us. They were first entity on the ground, practically, the morning after the Lieutenant Governor and I had that phone call with Alex Morse. And they were hugely important in helping us stabilize and put the pieces back together again at the Holyoke Soldiers' Home. Our mobile testing program, which wasn't just about the nursing homes, but also took place in a lot of places we would call testing deserts around Massachusetts, was driven and led by the National Guard. The National Guard played a huge role in our food program in the city of Chelsea. They do a lot of different really important things here in Massachusetts. And like I said, they come when they're called, and typically we bring them in when we have either issues that we believe we need their help on, or we hear from communities that are looking for them to help them. So they're going to stay active until such time as we get through the variety of emergencies, especially with respect to COVID, that we've been dealing with.
Governor, do you see the state meeting its funding obligations for the Student Opportunity Act, given the major or projected tax revenue losses from the pandemic?
There are so many moving pieces associated with our fiscal position that it's very hard to answer really big questions, and I know that's a bit of a dodge, and I apologize, but it's true. I will say that there's currently there's a supplemental budget currently before the legislature that is all about getting reimbursed by the federal government for many of the dollars we have already spent. The way to think about this is we've spent hundreds of millions of dollars on personal protective equipment, right? We basically got into that business. And those are all reimbursable under the emergency declaration that we issued and the president signed. But I can't get federal reimbursement for that until the legislature appropriates the money that's associated with that. So we then have an appropriation that we can take and then file the reimbursement with the feds to get reimbursed. So there's a whole bunch of moving pieces here. There's the legislation I talked about that we're going to advocate for that hopefully will come out of the legislature in July. But there's also this huge amount of federal reimbursement that's available to us that we need the legislature to act on that stuff so that we can get that federal reimbursement and don't leave that on the table. The way to think about this is FEMA gets appropriated funds during an emergency, right? And those funds are available until they're gone. Now, that doesn't mean you don't get reimbursed at some point down the road, but if you're not one of the people who gets in line relatively early with all your incurred expenses that are federally reimbursable, it may be a while before you get the money. And it's very important to us, with all these moving parts between us and the feds and local communities, that a lot of this stuff get buttoned up and done. And it's hard to comment on something like how the big pieces of the budget are going to play out until we know more about that. The other thing we don't know is we all pushed our tax filing deadlines off to July because of the COVID pandemic and a desire on the part of the feds and the states to give people a longer lead time to actually pay taxes that would normally have been due in April. So we don't really know what the actual tax revenue for the month of April, which is the biggest month on the calendar in the fiscal year, is going to look like until people actually pay their taxes in July. So there's just a lot of moving parts.
Thanks, everyone. Vote by mail.
Chief mascot, the clarification, Lieutenant Governor, will those be permanent changes that the funds would start to help do, like on these sidewalks? Are we going to see a change in our downtowns?
Well, it certainly will change for the near future, as these are parking spaces, parking lots, sidewalks that have been used for other purposes will be changed. So, for instance, you might need Jersey barriers in order to close off a street to make it a dining area, and then create a pass area for accessibility purposes and for mobility purposes. So there will be changes, and until such time that we return to another use for those locations. I can also say, as part of this program, the Safe Routes to School is a part of this as well, as we prepare for fall reopening, to encourage communities to think about how to move children into schools, and maybe more walking and parent drop-offs for walking and biking to school will be part of this as well. So these are meant to be funds that are available, can quickly get into the hands of municipalities, transition these spaces so that we help restaurants, we help retail, we help the local downtowns and main streets become active with more outdoor uses, which from the public health standpoint is really encouraged. So this is innovative, it's creative, but it's also an exciting opportunity for municipalities.
Thanks, everyone. Could you weigh in on vote by mail, Governor? It looks like that's headed towards your desk pretty soon.
Mike?
Hey, the general
No, there's a general rule. We don't speak on legislation that's currently working its way through the process. Because weird things can happen. I really want to see the bill. I want to see the bill that I'm actually going to be asked to sign.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you. Governor, thank you.
Thank you.